So for the next month or so, the bulk of my videos are going to be things I made from around Christmas time. To be perfectly honest, a lot of the stuff I wish I would have had done before Christmas, but I was just extremely busy this year. If you're a woodworker and you do it for customer jobs, especially around the holidays, things just get really crazy, and I'm really bad at saying no to last minute orders. So I just get really, I spread myself out pretty thin around the holidays, but that is neither here nor there with this. For this video, this is a project, this is a Christmas gift for my brother-in-law, my siblings and significant others. We have done a secret Santa, I think, the last 3 years. So instead of buying for 10 people or so, you're just buying for one, and you could put a little more thought and money into each gift. So I got my brother-in-law this year, and he really likes Star Wars, and I got it out of my nephews and my sister that his favorite character at the moment is the Mandalorian. So they live pretty close, and I hang out with them a lot. And this summer I was at their house, and we were outside just hanging out, and they didn't have a portable speaker. So I thought it would be cool to make a Mandalorian helmet and put one of those Rockler Bluetooth speakers in there so you could play music off your phone. So that is essentially what this is. You can see there's a control panel in the back of the helmet, and then the helmet part where the ear kind of detail would be is where I put the two speakers. And this is not done. He was very gracious in the sense that I could give it to him as a present. You could see what it is and what it's going to be, but there's a little bit more carving left to do, and I have to clear coat it. So that's where it's at. So he returned it after the holidays, and I'm going to finish it up. So this is going to be a 2-part series. I thought I might be able to squeeze it into one, but it was just going to be a little bit too long. And the first part is basically going to be the layering of the piece and rough carving it. And then the second part of the video will be going into fine detail, forming all the facial features of the helmet and adding the speakers. So the way I start any carving project is I print out a bunch of close-up photos of what I want to carve, mainly because it serves as a reference, but also because I really am not a great drawer. So using these sort of photos, I could scale out the pieces, and it makes my life a lot easier. If you can draw, life will be a lot easier for you. So basically, using those photos, I'm going to be using 3/4 inch blanks. So I kind of decided that a 14 by 14 box is what I need to start. I didn't necessarily undersize that, but you'll see later in the video how I wish I would have made that whole box about 1 inch wider in each dimension. It would have saved me some time. But to get started, I just have a pile of scrap. I don't really throw away a lot of pieces, and I'm happy I don't, because you always end up using them. So I just took a bunch of hardwood scrap I have around the shop. I'm cutting them into 3/4 inch blanks. As you can see, I cut them into slats, and then those slats I'm cutting into 3/4 inch blanks. Now I have a lot of scrap in my shop that is closer to 1 inch, not necessarily 3/4. Those pieces, like the maple I'm cutting up right now, is more like 7/8 of an inch. I didn't bother cutting the one dimension into 3/4. It's close enough. It'll still look like a nice grid. I just have to make sure that one dimension of each piece is 3/4, so that I have a flat surface to start stacking off of. But basically, as you can see, I'm going through. I started with cherry, then I went to maple, and then that was oak. So then once that was done, I went through and I cut these all down to 14 inches long. So you can see I have a stop set off on my radial arm saw, and I'm just slicing all these down. Now I'm saving all the bits because you'll see there's going to be a box I'm putting in the middle of this. So I have a 14 inch stack, a little bit shorter than 14 inches, and then a shorter stack. So then I took the main photo and I cut it into, I sliced it down the middle in half, and then across the top in half, and then I made it into a 3/4 inch grid, so you kind of lay out where the ears were going to be, so I could go through and layer this. The main reason is because for the speakers I got, they tell you that you should have, I believe it was a 3.5 inch by 8 inch box is the best sound quality for the speaker. So this is the 3.5 inch by 8 8-inch box I made for the center, so the speakers will be going through those. So I'm working around this box. So you can see I drew center on my piece and center on that box, and I'm just kind of using the photos in order to make sure that box is where I want it for the speaker to line up with the ears. Doesn't matter if the speaker's centered in that box, but that's where I want it to be. So you can see that's where all the small pieces come into play, because the box will take off a fair amount. So once I had all these layered up, I could go through and glue this all together. This was a fairly long glue up, so you'll see how I tackle that as this goes on. These are basically just I'm gluing them in layers. You could see now why 3/4 inch was important, because I need each layer to be the same level. So just add a ton of glue, and then on each piece add some. You're gluing it very similarly to if this was a 3-dimensional cutting board. It's the same sort of process. So then as I go up, you'll see there it is. I have melamine that I'm using as cauls for the edges, so I could clamp this together as I'm going up and reinforce those joints and keep it clamped, because like I said, this is a long glue up. I didn't want to do it in multiple pieces. So I'm attaching my plywood box, and then when I'm doing the short ends, the ones in the back are about 4 inches, the ones in the front are about 2. So I'm just building up material around that box. And then once I get to the top of the box, I'm once again going to 2 straight pieces. So like I said, this was all scrap. It's all hardwood scrap, a maple, walnut. I think there's a little bit of mahogany, cherry. I do have some poplar in there. Those are the main lumbers I'm usually working with. So then this is the piece, and I kept it glued to that plywood base I had to make my life easier. And what I'm doing is, the easiest way for me to do this is I'm using a chainsaw and I'm roughing out the shape of the head. So the Mandalorian's head is not basic, but there's not a lot of detail to it. So I wanted to get the basic dome going. So you can see I'm using the photos and I'm using a lumber marker to just make my rough lines and then cut it down to size. So before, what I was showing is that I just miscalculated how far I would be cutting into the head, and I started cutting into the plywood box. I do address this, and I'll address it a little bit in this video and then finish it up in the second video of how I deal with the fact that I cut into that box. Like I said, if I oversized this, it wouldn't have been an issue. I didn't want it to be huge, which is why I made it the size I wanted. But if I would have made the entire thing about an inch bigger, the box would have not been an issue. So like I said, I'm just going through and roughing this out. It's just a process of, I have multiple views of the head, a front head, a back head, a side view, as well as like a 3/4 inch side view. Just going through, making cuts, putting the head on the picture, drawing on it with the lumber marker, and just getting those angles as good as I can. And like I said, the easiest way to do this, for me at least, is with a chainsaw, cutting off the bulk of the material. So you can see the helmet in the photos. It's somewhat one-dimensional. There's not a lot going on except for a few parts. So at this point, I've kind of skipped ahead, and that was when I decided it'd be easiest to take the box out of the head and just fill the void with lumber instead of trying to patch things. So at this point, I'd cut through the side of the head, removed the plywood box, and now I'm just cleaning this up with a die grinder. Now, you don't necessarily need a die grinder to carve. I have it, so I used a chainsaw die grinder and then a rotary tool or a Dremel. You could do this all with a Dremel if you wanted to. So now I'm putting in my rough lines. This head is still not the proportion I want it to be, but the way that I like to carve is I like to get it close to size, and then I like putting in my rough lines just so I know where all the components fall. I'll eventually go back and shave a lot of this down, but at least I know, like I said, where the proportions are. I don't like to wait too long to do this, because you'll start cutting off bits and pieces that you need. So I'm just using an oscillating tool to go through, like I said, and put in the rough lines. There's not a lot of detail on this head, I keep saying that. So there's a couple arches in the front. There's some helmet detail, but not a ton. The big challenge with this was there's 2 indents on either side of the mouthpiece on the mask. And the hardest part I had with this was finding a photo that showed exactly what that dimension looked like. In some photos it looks like it's curved, but I finally found one that shows that this dimension is flat. But this was basically removing a lot of material on this inside portion of the face. So I'm going to be using a series of tools. Start with the oscillating tool, then the cone bit. This is a extreme bit to remove a bunch of material. So I ended up, at the end of the day, I thought I could get away with only cutting off one side of the head, but I ended up cutting off both, and then I'm going to plug them with a piece of walnut. This is walnut left over from one of the last projects I did. So because that box was in there nicely, it leaves a nice square hole. I just took the plywood box out of there and filled it in. You can see I'm just filling it with walnut now. I do end up changing this a little bit, but you won't see that till the next video. This is just pointing out that indent, and that was the photo I found that shows really well that it is a flat shape instead of curved. In some of the photos it looks like it's kind of curved. So you can see that right now I have it a little bit of a curve. And also the helmet itself is on a slight angle. So this is just cutting that angle on the bottom. Once again, I use a chainsaw. I could get a pretty straight cut out of a chainsaw. And then this is when it really started to look good, in my opinion. Before that, carving is one of those things where it won't look great for a very long time, and then all of a sudden it kind of pulls itself together. And adding that angle on the bottom of the piece completely changed it and really started to make it look like the helmet that I was going for. So this is just pointing out that the sides of the face are too fat at this point. They need to be trimmed down. So I'm going to go through with the chainsaw, and I'm going to trim up that walnut that I plugged the night before, but also take down part of the helmet's head. You can see I still have that lumber marker. I'm always drawing my lines and making sure that I have the detail parts mapped out so I don't cut too much into the piece. It's very easy to take away too much with the chainsaw. So this is the basic shape that I'm left with.